Hey, Pat. Can you hear
Hey,
me?
John. Yep, I can hear you.
What's up, sir? How are
How are
you?
you? Good. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. I'm been crushing it. I'm rebuilding systems in the business before the holidays, which is like trying to make sure that all of the crappy stuff that we built last year doesn't carry forward into the crazy time. I'm pushing at both ends of the at the spectrum right now, just trying to get done. And our e-commerce business, like last year, was a small enough business to actually like recover from all the little mistakes and inefficiencies. And this year, like we're expanding into another warehouse just for it. So if we have
Wow.
the same mistakes, we're SOL. We're
They'll
like that.
be amplified. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I'm like kind of freaking out, kind of not, but I'm really excited about tonight. How was the first month of work been?
That's good. Yeah. You know, not digging the commute, but I get to listen to NPR, which is nice. So
That's all. How far is the drive?
about an hour each way.
Oh dang, man, you got to get podcasts.
Yeah.
Or you know what I really like is like books on tape where your brain just can shut down, like Harry
Yeah.
Potter or something.
Well, that's a good idea. I need to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. One of my favorite books that listened to in the last bunch of years is Born to Run with
Okay.
Chris McDougall, I think is his name. Um, and he did another one about Greek warriors. Freaking awesome.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So,
Yeah. I'm writing
all
that
right.
down.
So is that for imagination in your background?
It is. Is that okay?
Love it, man. I love it. It's right when you walk in and you got that case there on your right,
That's right. Yeah.
and then I'm just looking. They used to have Texas cheeses, so I gotta let you. I'm gonna spotlight your video so I can see it. If any of them are Texas, doesn't
Let's
look
see.
like it.
This was a staged picture, so we moved a lot of the signs. We did miss one.
Up here, yeah,
Yeah.
a couple down at the bottom.
Yeah, no, this I figure since it's cheese curd was,
Oh yeah,
what's more cheese curd than the state of Wisconsin?
there's nothing at all more. That's freaking awesome. When did you guys do that picture?
Oh, oh, this picture is back when I worked there, so that was probably 5 years ago, or
Okay, crazy.
yeah,
That Ken was the only few times that I got to go by. Ken was always there behind the register. Uh,
always.
Always a good. It was a great location.
Yeah, no, I really liked working for him. I tell you, I mean, it's still probably the prettiest place I've ever worked.
Yeah. Well, it was to me when I walked into For Imagination. It felt like things were about to fall on top of you.
It's like a bowling alley, yeah.
Yeah, right. And so we basically were like, we're gonna go the complete opposite direction, and we're gonna have like half of the walls are gonna be empty, bare of stuff. It's the complete opposite of a retail experience, but we never, we always have enough staff to kind of walk people through it. On
Yeah.
weekends, Imagination, there's probably 100 people deep in there trying
Oh
to.
yeah, I honestly don't know how they're handling like if there's like social distancing and homogenation is like, well, one person.
Yeah, right. Like somebody asked us, they're like, "Can you please open your shop?" I'm like, why would I do that? Right now, I can handle like 20, 30 people an hour. And if I do that, I can handle 2 people every hour. Like,
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
there's no, even like the classes. They're like, well, if you do it, we can sit at separate tables. I'm like, we can have 4 people in class. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't.
So we've got our cheese, per usual, got our cheese plate all set up. It's
Beautiful.
mostly all cow's milk today, which I think was an oversight. Um, for better or for worse. So,
Yeah, one mixed milk in there, right? Or
well, we just have Humboldt Fog. I'm thinking they
yeah,
must have switched something up at the last second, but it is
that's
what it is.
that's
They're all
okay.
delicious,
Yeah, exactly.
and a lot of cheddar is made with cow's milk, so I think we'll be fine. And then we've got quite a few pairings on the plate, and so it's going to be awesome. You have any questions before we dive in?
No, I mean I can lie and say summer sheep's milk.
Yeah, wouldn't that be funny? We don't. We don't need to. These are stand up on their own 2
Well,
feet.
one is called Deer Creek. It actually uses deer milk. Fun fact.
You can say that. That would be funny. Yeah. Is this your first time eating a deer milk cheese, y'all? That'd be fun. Elk. And your mom's coming on. Was she able to make it?
Well, yeah, she's here in person, so
Oh, no
she'll be
kidding.
tasting along off screen, probably, maybe.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for joining us tonight.
She's in the other room with the dogs, but I'll relay that. Yeah.
You know what's ridiculous is I'm like, oh, so I'm picturing you in for imagination. I'm like, oh, she must have gone to the stock room.
Oh.
That's funny. All right, why don't we get started? What do you think?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome. How's everybody doing tonight? Woo! Thank you for being here. Welcome. We're letting everybody in. This is going to be so much fun tonight. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to we're just admitting as many people as we can. Everybody get settled in. I am going to, I've got multiple screens going per usual, y'all. It looks like, Pat, you're being headlined right now. It looks like on the main screen. I'm going to spotlight my video for a second. What's up, everybody? This is going to be such an amazing night with our good friend, Pat Polowsky. If you guys have your screen set up, I see everybody getting settled in. Everybody got their cheese plate in front of them. Don't eat it all at once. It's going to be, yeah, there we go. Thank you, Terry, for holding that up. It's going to be such a great class. Pat and I were just hanging out. He's got this amazing cheese display behind him. You'll have to determine if it's a real background or a virtual background at some point. Choose for yourself. We are going to have a really incredible experience tonight. If you've got your Zoom window set up, there's 2 different ways that you can experience tonight. During certain parts, you can either have in the top right corner gallery view set where you can see everybody, or you can choose speaker view where you will see the speaker. And at times at many parts of tonight, I'll be spotlighting Pat so he can wow you with his knowledge and his passion and love for cheese. Those of you that are not on camera, the pandemic has redefined what camera ready means on a Zoom conference. So if you'd like to turn on your camera, we'd love to see your beautiful faces and all of your smiles. And then we'll know when you have a happy dance because you ate something delicious. And tonight, there's many cheeses on the plate that will make that a reality. So we'd love to see your faces. Also, I've got the chat window open. I'll be managing that through the course of the evening. So if you're celebrating something, let us know. Type it into the chat window. If you are drinking something, please let us know. We can actually talk about it. Hello, Alex. Welcome. Mitch, we have a couple of team members on tonight. Thank you for coming. Francis, Jackie, Molly, it's good to see you. This is going to be incredible. We've got Pat here. He is going to be making us fall in love with the foundation of cheese curds for National Cheese Lovers Day and what they end up in. So these American originals and these cheddar style cheeses. But definitely go ahead and use the chat window. Let's talk about it. And one of the things that because we have so much content tonight, we won't get to do it, but you know, all of our classes, typically all of our in-person classes, we've always done icebreakers. So the question we've asked in September of 2010 is, if you were a cheese, what would you be? I'd love if you were willing to answer that question in the chat window. I know that I'm going to say tonight, I will be I'm going to be Pleasant Ridge Reserve. It's well aged. And everybody that eats it typically likes it. So it feels good to me. So if you type in the chat window, if you were a cheese, what would you be? I'd love to hear from you. And without further ado, Pat said he's going to be the American single. I like that choice. And Terry is Humboldt Fog. So great choices, y'all. So I'm going to spotlight Pat's video here. And what we're going to do is Pat and I will kind of bounce back and forth throughout the course of the evening talking. But it's Cheese 201. So if you have questions, this is a best time to ask them because we can get nerdy and we can go deep. Otherwise, we'll end up serenading you at the end if we run out of things to say, which I highly doubt since Pat and I could talk about cheese for weeks without stopping. And so welcome to the tasting. All right, Pat, I'm going to spotlight your video and welcome to our adventure. Thanks for being here tonight.
Oh, thanks, John. Thanks everyone who joined in for the class. Really excited. I know the class's subject today is sort of the best of American cheeses, ones made here domestically. And I have a saying that upsets a lot of my European compatriots, but any cheese made in Europe, there not only is an equivalent variety in America, there's a superior one. That makes me pretty controversial in cheese circles, as you might imagine, but I think we'll taste some today that definitely live up to that. And part of this was inspired because tomorrow, October 15th, is National Cheese Curd Day, which is very much an American tradition, American style cheese. Other countries usually would press those together to make a block of cheese, but we were impatient when we first discovered that, so we got cheese curds out of it. So we'll discuss a little bit of how cheese curds are made. Luckily, a lot of the classic American styles are made in a similar manner. I do have some slides. I promise to keep it fun and light, not just blabber on and on. So I'll share my screen here. Here we go, and I'll just open up the chat window. So if anyone has questions along the way, I'll control it.
Francis asked, where are the cheese curds? We did cheese curds for our last tasting, so we wanted to create some variety, and we're going to go, every single one of these cheeses has them inside, so if you do your darndest, you'll be able to picture them.
Exactly, yeah, right. All cheeses start off as cheese curds, more or less. Well, I shouldn't say all, but most
just
do.
Not the squeak. We just don't have the squeaky kind on the plate.
Exactly, yeah. So real quick, I'd like to talk about what is in milk and cheese. This is sort of a little introductory to the science. I promise to keep it light, and it's useful for further on. I have a lot of cheese history in here as well, because most people are confused about the history of cheese, and somehow we think orange cheese is an American invention and not a British one, but I'm here to put that myth to rest. So in cheese, you have protein, which I think most people are familiar with. That is something I think that a lot of people like about cheese, is because it is a great source of protein, mostly casein and whey. You may have heard this in its other words, as Miss Muffet would say, curds and whey. Cheese curds are casein protein. We have fat in cheese, quite a bit of fat. What's important here, not so much for the chemical terms, triglycerides, or what fat is found like in cheese, and they break down to things called fatty acids. As you might imagine, if we clip off these squiggly lines, we get what's down here, fatty acids. Really important for flavor, and we're going to talk about that in a second. The breakdown of protein and fat is really crucial to get the flavor of lots of cheddars, all cheeses really, but especially cheddar cheese. It really relies on these kinds of reactions. Carbohydrates are important, especially for those who are listening who are lactose intolerant. Basically, all the cheeses we're having tonight, they are fermented using starter culture bacteria to break down the lactose into a lactic acid. Sorry, I have really bad handwriting, so when I try to draw right, my cursor goes wild. What that means, though, is these bacteria in these cheeses are breaking down that lactose to lactic acid. So people who are lactose intolerant usually are okay with most American varieties of cheese, like Cheddar. Most of the lactose is fermented day one of the cheese making process. And then finally, we have minerals. Minerals are important because not only have nutritional reasons, which I think are important, but they are also, they're basically structural elements in the cheese. You can think of casein as the building blocks of cheese. The mortar holding it together is calcium and phosphate. Okay, enough about the science. Let's just quickly, here's the sort of the structure of cheese. I like to think about it. You have the spongy matrix of casein, those curds, and embedded in there is all the good stuff, the fat, any residual water, calcium sort of gluing this all together. That's what those gray dots are trying to show. I do like to show this slide to talk a little bit about the the history of cheese through the years and when they were first invented, those kinds of things. And one thing I do want to point out is you'll notice all the newer ones are American inventions. I mean, we haven't been around that long compared to Europe. And you have Colby here, which was invented in Colby, Wisconsin in late 1800s. You can sort of see my bias coming through because Monterey Jack was invented around the same time in California, but I didn't want to highlight California on here. Apologies. And then, a century later, we have things called low moisture part skim mozzarella, which was invented basically taking regular mozzarella and trying to make it more stable for the markets outside New York. You had all the Italian immigrants in New York making mozzarella from home, but they need to send that out west. They need to ship it on rail cars. How are we going to do that? The American ingenuity kicked in, and low moisture part skim mozzarella was born. A little lower in moisture, a little lower in fat, made sure you could ship it easier, which is those kinds of things. We'll learn here how Colby and Monterey Jack, probably the two most famous American originals, sort of are basically variations on cheddar. And we took the English cheddar recipe, altered it, and made it our own. That's right, Kevin. USA, USA, exactly. So cheese making in America, it's pretty straightforward as far as how it got here. You had immigrants from Europe land in the Northeast, and that's sort of where the first cheese making hotspot of the United States was. New York, Vermont. These are New York's not known for cheese making outside the dairy circles, but if you're in the dairy world, you know New York, especially upstate New York, is one of the dairy powerhouses, even to this day, artisan and large scale. You can think of huge companies like Chobani being there, and the dozens and dozens of small artisan producers as well. And Vermont has pretty good marketing on their dairy, so people associate cheese with Vermont. But as the country expanded west, so did the farmers and their technologies. And they sort of stayed all along the Great Lakes. Having fertile soil there is helpful for cows to eat on the land, and also just very easy to transport foods and a lot of things. It's still a manufacturing hotspot for food to this day. In fact, I work in Chicago for a food manufacturer, so just carrying on that tradition. But a lot of those settlers settled in Wisconsin, and it sort of took off as a cheese-making hotspot. And then as people progressed west and west, of course, the West Coast became a hotspot for cheese making as well, mostly because of the climate. Cows could eat outside all year round. You don't have that opportunity here in the northern Midwest or Northeast. One thing I do want to point out is that it basically started off as farmstead at first, but then the Industrial Revolution took off. You think about the mid-1800s, we started mechanizing everything, building train cars and also making cheese. And the two first cheese factories, now when you think of factory today, you have a very different picture. The definition of a factory back then, as you can see, was, you see Jesse Williams in New York, he just had 10 neighbors worth of cows. So back then that was, 50, 100 cows, not the herd sizes you see nowadays, which are hundreds and hundreds in the factory system, thousands being collected over statewide networks. New York often likes to take credit for the first cheese factory. That is not only is that Northeast elitism, I think it might be a little sexism involved too, because the first cheese factory actually was by Miss Ann Pickett in Wisconsin. She was making cottage cheese from a bunch of her neighbors as early as 1841 and producing it basically in a quote unquote larger scale than one person would just in sort of their shed out back. I love graphs. I have to show graphs when I can. You can sort of see the takeoff here of the factory system once the Industrial Revolution took off. And then the farmstead cheesemakers sort of petered out, as you might imagine. Efficiency took over. But not all is lost. All the cheeses we're trying tonight are made from what I'd call, artisanal, and some are farmstead producers. They use the milk from the farm they get themselves. And you see this renaissance coming back. A number of artisan cheesemakers going up and up. I'm hoping this trend still stays true. COVID is definitely going to throw a wrench into things, I'm sure, for some folks. But I'm hoping that we see this trend continue where we have lots of smaller cheese producers sort of taking off and trying to do their best with the milk they're making. Quickly, the basic steps of cheese making. We'll go through these a little bit each way, and then we'll talk about some of them more in particular here in a minute. Of course, you start with milk. You do different things with that milk. Some of the cheeses we have today may have had some fat removed, or may have had some fat added back in to get the right texture they wanted, to get the creaminess they wanted. you produce acid. All the cheeses tonight are acidic somehow. Either they're adding acid, like they're dumping in the equivalent of lemon juice, or they're adding bacteria to ferment the sugar into acid, like we learned earlier. Some, I think all but one, are using rennet, which is basically a little enzyme that clips up those curds and causes them to stick together. We'll see a picture of that here in a minute. And then they're going to basically, the rest of this is all about how to remove all that excess water. You start with something that's really liquid, milk, and then you get something solid at the end of the day. And the cutting step, the cooking step, the draining step, the salting step to some degree, and the pressing step to some degree, these are all basically to encourage all that water to leave. I like to, in my own dystopian way, think about cheese making as the controlled dehydration of milk, because that's what it really is at the end of the day. And as you go and age the cheese, you get a nice final end product. My virtual background actually was I gave it away. I'm sorry, John, it's a virtual background. It's basically 3 feet to the right of where this picture is taken of this aged Gouda here, which is fun. So I mentioned we can manipulate milk. How can we do that as cheesemakers? You can basically manipulate a couple things. Fat and protein are the main ones. You may have seen ultra-filtered milk come about now. You can actually filter out lactose and those kinds of things. That's sort of more advanced, and only large-scale producers are basically doing that with cheese. But you can take fat and protein out. You can put fat and protein in. And how do we do that? Basically, you're just adding some dairy ingredients. You can add cream to the milk to make it fattier. You can add skim milk to the milk to make it more protein heavy, and vice versa. You can remove those as well. The cultures I mentioned, these are lactic acid bacteria. And remember, lactic acid bacteria are what we call starter cultures, just because they start off the process. And culture is just a standard word for bacteria. They take lactose here, which is milk sugar. Things that end in ose are usually sugar related. You can about glucose, sucrose, maltose. And lact here, of course, refers to milk. This was named after milk, not the other way around, which I think is a pretty cool thing. And basically, they ferment this and they form lactic acid. And that's what's giving the tanginess or the sharpness to a lot of these cheeses, is these bacteria break down the sugar, which doesn't actually taste sweet. Lactose is about 12% as sweet as table sugar, so you have struggle tasting sweetness, but it does form lactic acid. And if you're curious and you need a good chat up line at the bar, well, if people still go to bars, I don't know. Maybe where you're at, people are going to bars. Memorize some of these names, I'm sure they'll go over well. You have things called Lactococcus lactis, subspecies lactis. That's probably the most common one used in cheddar. And the one right below it, Cremoris. These two are really These two are really common cheddar cultures. Almost all the cheeses we're tasting tonight, I guarantee they have one or two of these in there.
Hey, can I set the team up quickly, Pat, with how to start eating the cheese?
Definitely, yes, please.
Quickly show, would you unshare screen for just a second?
Yep, sorry.
No, don't worry. I just want to make sure everybody's aware. So basically the way that we're tasting, if you have this cheese, a nice block cheddar, it's usually in a triangle. It should be in your 1 o'clock position, and that should be paired with the apricot. And to the left of it should be this beautiful yellow cheese with this kind of yellowy orange, slight dry rind to it. And that'll be paired with the peach jam that's on the inside in the cup. That'll be at your 12 o'clock. And so we're going to go around clockwise tonight. I'm going to be mentioning when to be eating cheeses as Pat continues to rock our world. So, and the first one, Pat, is Flurry's Truckle with a peach jam to peach his own from a California producer who actually just decided to close down her business because of the combination of the pandemic and the wildfires hurting the fruit in California and her not being able to get product. So pretty crazy. But go ahead and eat the Flurry's Truckle, y'all. Take a bite. It's great cheddar, Pat. I don't know if you want to briefly talk about it, or I'll come back on in a few minutes. But you can take over the chain again, and I'll type about the cheeses as we listen.
Okay, yeah. No, I love Flurry's Truckle. It's one of my favorite cheeses. This cheese shop behind me I actually worked at, and we were nice enough they would make the drive up from Iowa to here and actually taste it for us in person. It's one of my favorite. Truckle refers to the shape, actually, that the shape it comes in is, I'm actually think, I didn't crop this picture. I think there was some in this picture before I cropped it, but it refers to basically a cylinder that's longer than it is wide. And that's what the truckle refers to. And this is what's known as a bandage wrap cheddar. I have a few slides down the road talking about the history of cheese and where bandaging comes into play, but what it basically means is it's being wrapped in some type of fabric, either linen or cotton, those kinds of things. And not only does that protect the cheese from a, think about it from a utilitarian point of view, but it gives a nice environment for certain microbes to grow to give it some of that earthy, musty kind of flavor. It's sort of, if you smell the surface of the cheese, it's sort of like a basement, but in a good way, the most delicious way possible. And
it's tasting great tonight.
exactly, yeah. And talking about the microbes, here we go, almost on cue, like we have it sort of planned out. These are other microbes we can discuss about in cheese. We talked about some of the cultures that are making the acid, the tanginess, the sharpness you're tasting, but there's other ones that even Flory is adding here as well to get some other flavors going on. You have cultures that are really good at producing sweet kind of flavors, and you'll see these a lot in the Gouda styles, and the Swiss styles, things like Lucanostock and diacetylactis. For anyone on the line who's a chemist, you'll see the word diacetyl. That diacetyl tastes buttery to us. It's one of the main compounds that gives a buttery sensation, like buttered popcorn. And you'll probably get that in some of these cheeses if you try hard enough. Things that are lower in acid, usually you can pick up some of these more volatile top notes like diacetyl and butteriness. And then Propionibacteria. Sometimes that's added to cheddar along with another microbe called Lactobacillus helveticus on the other side to give it a sweet flavor. Very common in these kinds of truckle cheeses, the bandage wrap ones will add a little bit of this to give it a little sweetness. You have some cheese later on where they're just dumping it in by the bucketful to give it that sweetness as well. I'm not sure how deep we want to go into chemistry, but if you're curious, here's the actual chemical reactions of what's going on here. These cultures are breaking down different things and forming things as well. They form, some of them form gas. So if you ever eat Swiss cheese and know where the eyes come from, it's this gas that's being formed. And then you have brie as well. And the only reason I'm talking about brie really quickly is because we're gonna have a cheese later that has some white mold on the outside, and it's a really famous American original style cheese called Humboldt Fog. We'll get to that later, but I didn't want to jump around talking about each microbe on its own. Figure get all the science out of the way at once. And there, this white mold, it's called Penicillium camemberti, and you may recognize the word camembert here. And again, this microbe was named after the cheese, not the other way around, which is pretty cool. Microbiologists went out and found a cheese, scraped it, identified what was growing on it, and like, we're gonna name this its own species of mold after the place where we found it. And this is actually really common across a lot of different dairy products, like the lactose, lactic acid, all this is named for where they found it, which is, I think, pretty cool. Again, some more of the chemistry here. And then we have a few other cheeses here. Blue cheese, the reason we're talking about blue cheese is because one of the cheeses we have tonight is a cheddar blue hybrid. And again, these are caused by molds. You'll see the name Roquefort here. Again, for those who are familiar with blue cheese, you'll see Roquefort. This was originally found in Roquefort cheese in France, which I think is pretty cool. And then smear ripened. Smear ripened are cheeses that sort of, they do treatments to the rind. Classically, these are like your stinky cheeses like Limburger, but the same type of microbes here are also found in things like, the cheese the cheese we're gonna try later, like Humboldt Fog or Flory's Truckle, actually, that bandage on the outside encourages all sorts of bacteria, yeast, and molds to grow as well.
And the Flurries is tasting incredible tonight. I inhaled my piece. You have some with you, don't you? Are you getting to taste?
I'll taste afterwards. I don't like, because my mouth will be full and the cheese gets everywhere.
Fair enough. It happens. Not all of us can eat daintily in front of a group.
I'll just sip my coffee every now and then, but I've eaten enough Flory Truckle in my life, I think, for everyone on the call tonight. Real quick, we're gonna have a bunch of cheddars And we're gonna have an aged Jack here later. And Colby's another. These are all American originals, so to speak. I know cheddar is technically invented in Britain, but we've altered enough in our case that all the cheddars are trying tonight are very much in a more American style. And most people always ask me what the differences are between them. Some are cultural, some are more functional. Legally speaking, the line is very much blurred. You can, in theory, make a cheese that all of which would fall under any of these. In the industrial cheese industry, we sort of call it the multi-purpose block cheese, where if you thread the needle as far as the minimum and maximum moisture and fat contents, you can call it anything you want. But traditionally, cheddar has the lowest moisture of these. Colby's a little higher, and then fresh Monterey Jack would have the highest moisture. Well, we're trying to nice an aged Jack, so they took that and put it on a shelf and removed that moisture, so it's actually drier than all of these. And you can do that with cheddar as well. And then the next one is very cultural, sort of where these cheeses were founded. Cheddar became very popular in the Midwest, in Wisconsin, and in Vermont in the Northeast. So, in the Midwest, we color our cheddar yellow. In the Northeast, it's white. Colby was invented in Wisconsin, so of course it's gonna be yellow. And then Monterey Jack, founded in proliferation in California. Again, it's white. So on the coasts, but the coastal cheese-making centers, they don't really do a lot of colored cheeses like we do here in the Midwest. And again, that's just cultural. And we'll learn why here in a minute. It all has to do with history. And then the flavor is probably the biggest determining factor of the difference. I like the Florey's truck we had tonight, probably had some nice sweet, earthy notes, but you probably also got maybe almost umami, some of like the really savory, tangy, acidic, slightly sour notes that you get with a lot of cheddars. That's really exemplifies cheddar. Colby, on the other hand, we say sweet. It doesn't really taste sugary sweet, but it tastes less acidic, so we just call it sweet because it's less acidic. A little more buttery, those kinds of things. And then Monterey Jack is, when it's young, it tastes sort of like Colby, and when you age it out, it develops really almost pronounced sweet, nutty aromas and flavors because of the cultures they're adding. So you can definitely get a wide variety there with those cheeses. Coagulation. So we've added microbes to our milk. We've developed flavors from those microbes. We got to make them stick together. We got to form the curd somehow. And this is a crucial process in the cheese making steps. You have these proteins bouncing off each other in milk, as you can see here. They're constantly sloshing past each other, as you might imagine, in 3 dimensions, and that they're liquid. These little hairs on the outside that you see here sort of causing them to repel each other. When we add an enzyme rennet, it clips off some of those hairs. Just imagine like taking a razor blade to someone's head. Now that smooth surface is sort of sticky, and they can stick to each other and form solid cheese. So here, you have a liquid, and I promise not to do writing, but I'm gonna try my best here. And here you have a solid, and now, as you might imagine, the solidified stuff, all the water that's around here is free to now leave and drain away. And that's what we try to do. Real quick though, why is Monterey Jack, why is Colby less acidic than cheddar? It has to do with a crucial step in the process. After they've cut up the curds, they've sort of in little chunks floating around all that way. You can see these guys here doing the same here. They're cutting it up right now, and back here you can see them floating in that way. What they're gonna do is sort of spray water on them. Here you can see this is Gary Grossen back here, a master cheesemaker in Wisconsin, making some fresh cheddar cheese curds. He's gonna spritz them with water or even submerge them in water. And what that does, as you might imagine, is when you put something in water, things like to leach into it, right? When you rinse something, things sort of get rinsed away. And what we're doing here is rinsing away some of that lactose. And when you drain that away now, there's less lactose there. Less lactose means less sugar to ferment by those bacteria, which means less acid. So that's a critical step that's done in Monterey Jack that you'll try later, where to remove some of that acidity, to let some of those other flavors come through. They usually rinse those curds off, or they submerge them in water for a bit, then drain them away. And all of it's to remove the sugar so you get less acid. Maybe this is a good time, John, maybe to jump into the next cheese.
Absolutely, yeah, I just typed into it. So we are tasting the Deer Creek cheddar. It started as a triangle. It is now slowly working its way to non-existent. This is from the Artisan Cheese Exchange. So the first cheese that we had is sort of a impression of an English style truckle, that cylinder cloth bound shape. This is classic American block cheddar, comes in 40-pound blocks, big old heavy things. Chris Gentine and his team at Artisan Cheese Exchange actually go to select and grade these batches of cheese. And so this is the only AA graded block cheddar in the US. It's called Deer Creek Cheddar. The company has won over 80 some odd awards. They're just masters at this. And it's aged for 1 year. So it's creamy, buttery, sweet. It's got that sweetness. It's got way more moisture than that Flurry's truckle because in the cryovac aging environment, it doesn't lose as much to evaporation along the course of its aging. Doesn't have a rind. The plastic of the cryovac actually protects the cheese. And we paired it with a Turkish apricot. So it was, Francis was asking, it was to the right of the truckle. So we were having the truckle with that peach jam and then the triangle, white block triangle cheese with the apricot is this pairing number 2. It should be at your 1 o'clock, hopefully at your 1 o'clock position. And it's just to the left of the cheese that has the salami as well. So I hope you like it. I thought it was awesome. Yes, and friends, yes, the truckle is a cheddar. So there's multiple different types of cheddar on this cheese plate tonight. And so the first one was a cloth bound cheddar that we had. And the second is a American-made block cheddar. So they're both made in a cheddar style, but as Pat was mentioning, the United States kind of made some adjustments to the process and recipe and created what is a much more, would you say, easy to produce cheese, Pat?
It is, but as we'll learn here in a minute, the bandaging is actually an American tradition as well.
Wow, all right.
At the yeah, there's lots of interesting, everything people think the British did with cheese, we did, and vice versa. That's going to be the spoiler alert for tonight.
That sounds awesome.
The Deer Creek. So is this everyone's first experience eating a deer milk cheese?
Nice.
Joking. Deer Creek is the body of water near where this company was founded. But you'd have to probably, I don't think deers produce much milk. You'd probably have to wait a long time to make cheese from deer.
In New Zealand, they do it.
Wow.
I couldn't find one, but they do it. They have a lot of deer in that.
That's funny. I mean, if they have plenty of sheep, deer sneaks in, they probably don't realize it.
So good.
So this is a good point to talk a little bit about cheese color. I like to think about cheese color falling on a spectrum. You have orange cheddars, which will happen here in a minute. You'll see ones that are really deeply, intensely orange. And that comes from an extract called annatto or achiote. If you've ever had the Mexican rice in restaurants that's orange, it's the same thing. It's the same pigment. They're adding achiote to the rice. Anyone uses Goya Sazon in their cooking, that's where that color is coming from. The same color is what's causing cheddar to be orange. No one's really done a full-fledged study to say if it has effect on flavor. You can drink some of this extract. I wouldn't suggest it. It stains pretty bad. Your mouth will be red for at least a week or two. At least it was in my experience. It doesn't really have much of a taste. It really is just a color. But no one's done real studies. That's why I have an asterisk on there. If the cheese has been aged for 15 years, who knows what's going on in there with that. Then we have yellow. Like the Deer Creek cheddar you're having right now. It's not orange. It's not snow white either. There's a Humboldt fog there that you'll see that's sort of like as white as snow, as white as a sheet of paper. This falls in the middle. And you'll see different shades of yellow in the cheddars that you eat. Like the dry jack we'll have later is a little yellow. And all this is a function of beta carotene, like basically what vitamin A is before it gets broken down. Beta carotene is yellow, and in enough intensity it becomes orange. And it comes from grass. So when cows eat grass, they eat beta carotene. That beta carotene gets deposited into the fat. So if the fattier something is, the more beta carotene there is. So that's why sort of cream has a slightly more yellow color than milk does, which is white, which is even less yellow in skim milk. And part of that is a function of how much fat there is, because fat is the thing that's contributing the yellow cream color. Usually you can assume the yellower the cheese, assuming they're not adding a color like we did up here, the more grassy it is, because it means the cows are eating more grass. Cheeses you get from New Zealand, like John was mentioning, or from Ireland or England or the West Coast, can usually be really, really yellow because those cows can eat grass year round. Deer Creek in Wisconsin and ones in the Northeast, the cows aren't so lucky, right? There's only like, in Vermont, there's only like 2 weeks of summer, I think. So they can't really eat grass that much, so their milk won't have as much beta carotene in it. And then we have white, because we do have a goat cheese to try tonight. And here, the white color is basically because goats have a really special, and sheep, and buffalo actually too, goats have a really special metabolism. They're able to take this beta carotene here, and they're able to take this beta carotene here, and they have a little enzymatic machinery in their small intestine that clip it in half. And if you clip a beta carotene molecule in half, not only does it become colorless, you get vitamin A. So goat milk, sheep milk, buffalo milk, some other animals as well, hamster milk, fun fact, is really high in vitamin A, and it's colorless. Because of this little reaction that happens in some animals. Cows don't do this to great degrees, so that beta carotene stays intact, goes where the fat goes, and you get a yellow cheese. But why? Why are we adding this orange color? Which cheese is the hamster one? Mitch asks. I'm gonna let John cover that one in the next break. So.
Yeah. We that's an entire class, though. I don't think we want to spoil that. We'll be doing hamster, yak, and camel milk cheese tasting.
I think that's the level 301.
Yeah, 301. Exactly.
So people often ask, why did we decide to make cheddar orange here in the Midwest? Or why do we continue to do it is probably the better question. And we do it right now because it's cultural. When I think of cheddar, I immediately think of something that's orange, versus people who grew up in the Northeast, when they think of cheddar, immediately think of something that's white. And that's just a cultural thing. But the actual history of it is traced back to England. Here I have a little quote from quite a long time ago, the House of Commons in the 1800s in England. And as you might imagine, before cheese really took off, butter was the hot commodity. Butter is just fat from milk and cream, and that's where all the color went. Since that beta carotene follows where the fat is, that's why butter is yellow. So oftentimes, they would skim off a lot of the fat to make butter, as it says here, and what was left was known as a skim cheese that had very little fat in it, not very good, as you might imagine, since there's no fat in it, and they referred to that as flat cheese. But as you can see here, they said that this is something they keep in mind, that the more butter they skim off the milk, the more money they can make. 4 firkins more money, whatever a firkin is. I didn't look up that conversion before doing this, my apologies. But the cheese that was left was really, really bad, as this culturally insensitive comment says here. And as you might imagine, people tried to push the limits as much as they could. So people would be like, take away more fat, take away more fat, take away more fat. The problem is, unfortunately, visually, you could see the difference. The cheese became less and less yellow. So how do they trick people? They added yellow back in the form of annatto. And so you can think of adding annatto to cheese as being one of the first examples of mass consumer deception used in the food industry. And I'm here to tell you, as a member of the food industry, it continues to this day. Not just joking. A little bit, but not as bad as back then.
Not as bad as that comment, but certainly it does.
Yeah, and you have to think about location, and we'll get here in a second as well. But I used to teach, when I was in grad school, I taught a dairy science class, and I did a history of cheese usually before Christmas break, just as a fun one. We would taste a bunch of cheeses. And when I show this picture of a cheesemonger, this is what was a cheesemonger. This is an example of a cheesemonger from mid-1800s London, or an artist's interpretation of it. Someone in my class said, "Pat, that looks like you." I took that very personally until it pulled up a picture. Someone pulled up a picture and be like, "Yeah, actually, that sort of did look like me. My hair was a little longer back then." So when I had longer hair, it's sort of like, okay, I'd buy that. And I also worked as a cheesemonger at the time too, so I won't hold that against them. But I'm here to tell everyone that orange cheddar is a British invention. this consumer deception was going on in Britain long before Americans even knew what cheddar was. And London was the cheese eating capital of England. They could not get enough cheese. They outgrew their domestic capacity. So they needed to source cheddar from elsewhere. France, Europe, they didn't do those kinds of cheeses, as you might imagine. Cheddar is an English invention. So like, where are we going to go? We're going to go to the closest brethren we have and ask America if they can make us some cheddar. New York was at full capacity. The Northeast was the hot spot of cheese making at the time. Wisconsin was up and running though. So like, excuse us, Wisconsin, could you make us some cheese? And Wisconsin's like, of course, we'll do whatever you want. We need to milk our cows. We need to make some money. But it has to be yellow. It has to be orange. And through the years, we're bumping up this, adding more and more yellow. People started getting used to it. And Wisconsin's like, sure, we'll do whatever you want. As long as you buy it from us, we'll add as much orange as you'd like. And this is why that the orange tradition got rooted here in the Midwest. It was because they basically were bowing towards the request of all of these unsavory cheesemongers in London. And it just stuck around here as a tradition. England, they moved on past that. They sort of went back to the right way of not tricking their customers. And here we just sort of kept with the adding the color, just adding it just to add it. We didn't actually skim the milk here when we made that cheese, but we had to add the orange color at this point because people were just so used to the deep, intense orange. So if anyone says America corrupted cheddar by turning it orange, you can firmly tell them, actually, it was the Brits. We were just trying to help out their struggling markets.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
On the flip side, real quick, we just had the Florey's truckle, so I want to mention it. People assume that this cloth-bound cheddars was a British invention, but you have to imagine when cheddar was in its heyday in the mid-1800s, where was the top producing cotton cloth place in the world? It was actually America. And here's a little excerpt of this is called the Penny Magazine. This is basically like the Reader's Digest for England in the 1800s. You can see them actually describe some of the American cheese-making practices, which is an oddity to them. So one thing they mentioned here is that it had, well, first they ding us and say it has a pungent and bitter taste. Like, okay, that's fine, erudite English people. But then they said it has a bandage or linen on the outward rim, which they thought was unique. And also I want to mention here, natural color, little or no artificial coloring being employed, which was news to them because they've been chocolate this stuff full of annatto for quite a long time. And this is back in 1842. So the idea of bandaging cheddar was a novelty to them, and the idea of not coloring cheddar was a novelty to the British back in the 1800s. So you can sort of see where these practices really got their start.
That's awesome.
Okay, so maybe now.
Is this a good segue for our next cheese?
I think so.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for teaching me new things every time, Pat. I love it, man. My education, that's going to improve my cheesemongering ability tenfold. So this next cheese that we're tasting, it actually has little specks in it, and the outside on the rind looks like it's been rubbed in a spice blend, which it has. So this is Red Butte. Red Butte Hatch Green Chili cheese. This is from Beehive Cheese Company. We did a tasting with them last week, Pat, with the other Pat of the industry. He led a cheese tasting and did our behind the scenes. And this, what was awesome about this is they make cheddar cheese, and they got into cheese in the early 2000s. He and his brother-in-law, they quit their jobs and they're like, let's do something in cheese. They went to a 3-day course at Utah State to learn about cheese, and that cheese school was really focused, their dairy classes were really focused on large industrial producers, and they were the first ones to show up that wanted to make cheese on a small scale. And they had no idea what they were doing, and they ended up calling them, talking to them, and the school, the Utah State was so excited for this small company to start that they gave them their recipe for Promontory, which is their base cheddar. So this cheese that we're tasting is Promontory with a slight change. So they've added green chilies, New Mexico green chilies into the paste, and then they've rubbed it with a spice blend on the outside. And you get this really amazing richness. And I think what's cool about them, they do cheeses like barely buzzed, sea hive, so coffee rubbed or honey rubbed, but they're always looking for new flavor profiles. And this one was a contest they did with Harmon's, which is a local, maybe not local, regional grocery store. And with the local cheesemongers, like everybody come up with something. So this actually was one of the cheesemongers at Harmon's ideas to do, and they made it, and now we get to enjoy it. So it's a super delicious cheese. This is made in a wheel and then aged in cryovac. So kind of a combination of the two things. Super delicious. And it's paired with Lucanica, which is a salami from Olympia Provisions in Oregon with a little bit of like citrus peel in it. Super good and super delicious. So hope you enjoy that. Y'all, if you have questions, let me know through chat. It's so good.
Looks like Lisa added the peach jam to it. That does sound good.
That does sound good.
Sweet and spicy. Okay, so this is actually good timing. So as you might imagine, flavored cheeses, you can have inclusions and those kinds of things. And that would occur sort of at this step in the process. You've cut up the cheese into curds. Now we need to encourage that water to leave, or the whey as we call it. And you do that through a few different mechanisms. One is you cook it. And cooking here, people think cooking, they think of like frying in a pan. Cooking for a cheese is like just above body temperature. That's hot enough to encourage that whey to leave, or to synerese, as we say in the scientific parlance. And what happens is the whey leaves, it sort of contracts the curd, and that sort of firms it up. And you have, this is what curds and whey are basically. You can see some curds and whey being made right there. We did not plan this, but serendipitously, this is actually a picture from Beehive Cheese. So that's just hilarious that it happened that way.
That's awesome.
I promise we didn't plan it that way. Actually, I should say we did plan it that way. Look, that makes us seem like we really know what we're doing.
It's unscripted with Pat and John tonight. I think they already understand that.
Yeah. And so now they need to drain all that whey, that moisture. And you're going to try some cheeses tonight where they drain a lot more than others, because basically the firmness of the cheese is largely dictated by how much water they left in there. You can see here they're doing a practice, what we call in the industry trenching. At the one side of this big vat, there's basically a hole with a screen to drain away this whey. They're pushing the curd to either side here to give this little whey a channel to run through. You can almost think of the person holding this curd rake as Moses, and he's parting the Yellow Sea. A little bit of some cheddar math now, some of my favorite kind of math. You can start to see why some people ask why some cheddar is so expensive. Lots of things go into why cheese is expensive, as far as, it's been aged for 10 years. Someone had to pay for refrigeration for 10 years. That's not cheap. But one other reason is how inefficient the process is, we'll say, or basically how much they're concentrating it. For every 10 pounds of milk, you only get 1 pound of cheddar cheese, and that's on a good day. Some of the cheeses that are dried or aged, it's a lot less than 1 pound. It's like a ½ pound. So you might imagine this 10% yield, it's very difficult, and you have a lot of whey to deal with afterwards. And whey is not, you can't dump that down the drain. That's against most municipal codes because it has a high biological oxygen demand. So if you do something with it, you can donate it to a farm, feed it to pigs. Pigs love it. Cats actually enjoy it, I've discovered on accident. You can give it to your plants. You can water your plants with it. Sometimes they spray it on the roads to try to melt salt. Or to melt snow as opposed to salt. They've tried to do lots of things with the whey. Now companies are actually getting involved with, like, they're gonna take the whey, filter it, treat it, and dry it into whey powder. That's a big commodity nowadays with everyone so obsessed with protein. And here's a little more math just to hammer home the point. One thing I want to say on the average cheddar, you can see you start with a lactose content of 5%. By the time you get, by this point in the process, like this point here, that cheese is 0.2% lactose usually if it's a normal cheddar process. So, like, as you might imagine, with a couple more hours of aging, that's gonna be fermented away. So people who are lactose intolerant, unless you are one of those people that sort of just swell up at the sight of milk, you're pretty safe with most cheddars. They're going to take those curds now, start stacking them together. This is the beginning of the cheddaring process. This is how cheddar gets its name. They take these curd slabs and stack them, turn them over. This is a steam jacketed kettle, so there is steam going in there, keeping this nice and warm, a little sauna. This is encouraging those curd particles to fuse together, or to knit, as we call it. Basically, those seams go away. Some of the cheeses you're trying tonight, if you look close enough, you probably can see those seams. Sometimes the chemistry works out where the seams don't disappear, and that's actually called seaminess in cheese. And USDA, who grades cheddar cheese, considers that a defect in excess amounts. And here's some ways if anyone really wants to know how to prevent seaminess. If I know in today's, what's the word that I've used now, in today's unprecedented trying times, seaminess might be not the biggest problem of the day. But here's how to get rid of it if you are a cheesemaker, which I think is pretty cool. Sometimes cheesemakers sort of spritz the curd with water, and that's to help fix that seamy problem. Cheddaring and milling, that is the special things for cheddar and for cheese curd operation. So those slabs you saw earlier, an hour later, this is what they look like. These are floppy, and these have the texture of chicken breast now, which is pretty cool. That is what's really unique about the cheddar process. And then they're going to put it through what's called a curd mill. OSHA's favorite thing. We like to call them finger chopper offers, which in fact is the signs demonstrating here. But that's going to take those slabs that this gentleman's putting in here. This is now a picture of Vermont. This is Shelburne Farms, Vermont. They're making cheddar cheese curds here. And it's going to cut them into these chunks, and that's what cheese curds are. And now you can take that and press it together and make cheddar. But I think now is a good stopping point to talk about my favorite cheese of the lineup tonight, Red Rock, if you want to talk about that, John.
You want to talk about it because you love it so much? You did last time too.
I would love to. Let's see, is it in this? I'm trying to see if it's in this picture somewhere. Oh, see, there it is. Like, oh, I'm headless, but there it is, right there on the bottom of my screen. There's wrapped up pieces of Red Rock. It's made by a fourth generation cheesemaker called Christopher Raleigh. Chris Raleigh. He's based in Shullsburg, Wisconsin, which is sort of the center part of the state south. Okay, quick tangent. Well, I'll describe the cheese first. It's a cheddar blue hybrid. Maybe you'll see some veining in there. That's blue mold, so it'd be like a blue cheese. People who don't like blue cheese, this is the gateway cheese. You try this one, you may catch a bug for it. That's probably a bad metaphor to use now because of COVID, but you may catch you may have a beneficial and affliction for it after this. It also has a natural rind on it, similar to how the Florish truckle did. It doesn't have the cloth on it per se, but that gives it a really interesting depth, earthy flavor. And Chris is not shy with the annatto for this cheese. It is deeply, intensely orange like this cheese is here. And that's because he's adding a lot of annatto. That's the color he's after. There's a cheese in England called Red Leicester, and that was sort of inspiration for this kind of cheese. And he has another cheddar blue hybrid called Dunbarton Blue. That's more of a white cheese, not yellow. But it's really interesting how these cheeses came about. So he's fourth generation. He had Swiss heritage who came to Wisconsin in the 1800s, like we talked about, and they made some Swiss cheeses. But by the time the third generation took over, 3 generations ago, his grandfather started making cheese and selling it to Kraft. To this day, actually, I don't think most people realize, like, people who make Kraft cheese, Kraft doesn't actually make any cheese. They buy it from regional producers, very large regional producers nowadays. Back in the day, they buy it from small farmers. And Chris's grandfather was one such concept, and his father did the same thing. As you might imagine, things got more mechanized. It was hard to compete with the big cheese factories down the road, so they kept making less and less money. And his father is ready just to give the business up. And he's like, I can't make money making mass-produced cheddar anymore. And Chris is like, well, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try to make some really interesting, unique things no one else is doing in the world, let alone the country, and sell those as really sort of high-end, interesting flavors and textures and methods. And that's where Red Rock and Dunbarton Blue came about. These are cheddar blue hybrids. Nothing had been done like it to this point. And he really wanted to target a different kind of customer, not sell it to Kraft to make Velveeta, but again, sell it directly to cheese shops, grocery chains, sell it directly to customers, something that you eat on a cheese board that's really, really good. And he makes a bunch of other cheeses as well. One's called Little Mountain. It's a Swiss style inspired by his great-grandfather's recipe. And that actually won Best of Show at the American Cheese Society a couple years ago. I don't remember which one it was. They all blurred together for me after a while. But I do remember I walked up to him right after he got off the stage and be like, "Congrats, Chris." And he's like, I've never seen someone look so happy and concerned at the same time. Because John can tell you this is true. When a cheese wins there, every cheese shop in the country the next morning is on the phone trying to order it. And Chris looks at me, white as a ghost, and says, "I only have one wheel of that." And it was just sort of funny. Like,
He said the same thing to every person he talked to that night. "I only got one wheel. Don't dislike me because I can't get you some." I said, "I'll wait a couple years. I'll be around. I'll be ready."
Oh, and here's actually his other cheese, the Dunbarton Blue. You can see this cheese right here with some of those blue veins going on. So it's similar to the Red Rock. And Red Rock and Dunbarton Blue are actually my favorite cheeses of all time, not just the ones we're trying tonight.
That's awesome. It tastes great tonight. You'll get to enjoy it in a few minutes.
Lisa, what does the rind taste like? I can't put my finger on it. That's a good question. I actually just bear with me 1 sec. I'll go run and try it.
That's awesome. What do you think, Lisa? Anybody else want to taste it? If it smells like dirt and it looks like dirt and it tastes like heaven, what do you think, y'all? Well, Pat comes on. Like licking a cave. Sure, why not?
Okay.
It tastes great. And yes, Francis, the pairing is with okra, if I didn't say that, put that in the chat already.
So I was nice enough to be given just a piece of the rind to taste. Thanks, Mom. And
I thought, oh no, is that what we shipped you?
no. And if you do smell it, you actually get something that we'll talk about here in a minute. Like the cave, it says, what you're smelling is actually a little bit of a whiff of ammonia, which is a really common thing you get with any aged food product. If you've ever spent time in cheese aging space or meat aging space, you get a little bit of ammonia, which is a byproduct of the protein breakdown. The thing that's causing the real interesting sort of eggy, umami flavors also causes this aroma, and you do smell it on natural rind cheeses like this a lot. Okay, I'm sorry. I was just provided with a real piece, so thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mom. Happy birthday.
Yep. You can find cheese.
I told John that this was a great two birds, one stone opportunity. Do a class, and this counts as a present to my mom. So
She gets to see you as the center of attention, a superstar. It's like rock star status, Pat.
I'm sure. That's funny. Okay, so I think we'll keep on trucking here.
The rind tastes outstanding tonight.
I really like it. This is the first time I've had Red Rock in probably a year, and it's really
Yeah. Well, it's the piece that we're tasting is slightly different than yours. It's slightly yeasty. It's quite delicious.
Ooh, I do like it, especially when it smells a little fermented. It's almost like it's begging to have something fermented with it, like a beer or something.
It's so good. All right.
Okay, a little more chemistry. I can't resist. This is important when we talk about any cheese. I mentioned earlier, calcium is the glue that holds cheese together, and that's what I'm trying to show here, is you have these strands of protein, the casein, remember? What's holding this together is little bits of calcium. You think of calcium as sort of like having two hands, and it's stretched out holding these strands together.
Hey,
Cheesemakers can, I'm sorry.
Pat, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your mom might not have seen that message that just popped up. So I'll read it out loud.
Oh, God.
Pat is the Mick Jagger of cheese, for real. So
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, Kevin and Tamara. That means quite a bit.
And they have not been paid to say those kind things. So fantastic. I approve this message. All right. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Kevin. Tomorrow, your check's in the mail. I appreciate it. And one way cheesemakers can control calcium content is by producing acid. We mentioned earlier that cultures produce acid. So the more acid that a cheese produces, those bacteria are fermenting. Just like acid dissolves the calcium in your teeth, acid dissolves the calcium in cheese. So the more acid there is, the less there is to hold it together, and you get a more crumbly structure sometimes. You get a more soft structure. The Humboldt fog we'll be trying is really, really soft, not only because it has more water, it's because it's very acidic, which means all the glue's gone, so it's sort of very crumbly. Any cheese that's really soft or crumbly, that's also on the drier side, is either really old or has lots of acid, and this is, you can sort of now understand some of the chemistry of why that might be. And here's just a really, really rudimentary animation trying to show that when you go to melt the cheese, it matters too. Cheeses with less calcium, less glue, usually melt better, fall apart easier, those kinds of things. Really quickly, I want to mention squeak. You can get some cheese curds, where that comes from. Here we have that structure I mentioned earlier. We have things being held together. Here I've switched up the colors just to keep everyone on their toes. You have sort of the casein mesh here is these blue dots, and then the calcium holding it together are those yellow hexagons. I love hexagons, it's my favorite shape. And a fresh cheese curd, this is being held together as your teeth shear through this. They're breaking those structures, and you're getting that sort of squeak. It's the friction of this matrix breaking against your teeth. And by fresh, I mean the day it's made. As cheese curds age, and by old here, old can mean a day or two old, enough acids have been produced by those cultures that some of that calcium has been dissolved. So now when you go to bite through it, it's less firm and rigid. So that means you won't get the squeak. But if you do get your hands on some cheese curds, you want to bring the squeak back a little bit, you can get this, put it in a microwave. Very complex chemistry happens that we won't go into tonight, involving hydrophobic interactions, and it sort of reforms up the structure a little bit to get the squeak. But you can't heat it so much that it melts. If it melts, well, then it's not going to squeak. Real quick, I think we'll do this, and then we'll talk about Indigo Ridge. Flavor can be created in cheese a couple different ways. Francis and Karen just said that Red Rock is their favorite so far. So here we're going to learn how Red Rock got some of its flavor. You have proteolytic flavors, which for any Latin scholars in the room, lytic means breakdown. Proteo refers to proteins, breakdown of protein. A common rule in sensory is big things don't taste like much, small things taste like a lot. So big intact proteins don't taste like much. When you break them down with enzymes called proteases, again, for Latin scholars in the room, ace means it's an enzyme. You get smaller pieces and lots of flavors. Some of these may be bitter, and you might pick that up on some of these cheeses, a slightly bitter note, which is actually pretty desirable when it's in balance. And you get other flavors too. Maybe some of these taste almost sulfury or eggy. Maybe some of these taste a little more umami. All these can be examples of protein breakdown flavors, or even sweetness as well. Then you have lipolytic flavors, the breakdown of fat. And this causes a lot of flavor as well. For example, those blue cheese notes that you got from the Red Rock, and some of the buttery notes you're going to get now from the Indigo Ridge, perhaps, is directly resulting from the breakdown of fat. You have this triglyceride here, again, intact. This tastes like butter. So not very flavorful, a little bit of flavor maybe. But when you break it down with enzymes called lipases, you get what's called free fatty acids. These are now small enough that they can float up and interact with your nasal passages. I'm going to do my best now to draw a nose. There we go. And these can interact with the nasal passages and cause really fun, interesting flavors. Fruity flavors are often caused by fat. You can think of, sort of piquant flavors caused by fat. If you ever get baby vomit flavor in cheese, sometimes that's a good thing, like if eating an aged provolone. All of this is caused by different free fatty acids. And I want to mention these enzymes. The cheesemaker is not adding enzymes. Microbes are just big bags of enzymes. So that's where that's coming from. And now let's talk about Indigo Ridge.
Fantastic. So Indigo Ridge, y'all, this is a cheese that comes from Schertz, Texas. So this is just north of San Antonio, about 45 minutes away from here. Susan Riggs was a bookseller for 15 years and then decided to quit that and become a cheesemaker. And cheese kind of chose her. And she has done amazing things with products. So she makes, this is her, one of her newer cheeses. She started making a smoked cheese smoked over pecans and a couple Italian style cheeses. Oftentimes she has a little bit of grittiness in the texture of her cheeses. She quite likes that. And so that's one of her, a fairly consistent thing from cheese to cheese. Indigo Ridge is like what she calls an Alpine hybrid. So it's a Gouda with a Gruyere flair is kind of how she presents it. It's considered an American original at the American Cheese Society competition, which determines that something is an original if it has 3 very unique characteristics and traits that end up either in the recipe or the make process. And so the American Cheese Judging Competition Committee, which I was a part of for 7 years, is the one that kind of looks at that. So it's maybe not governmentally specified, but that's pretty amazing that they've done that. So quite a bit of tanginess, aged for 8 months. And the way it gets its name, which you don't see here, this is actually a rind piece. The wax has been taken off. This cheese is coated in an incredibly gorgeous indigo colored purple wax. And so these wheels are amazing to look at and beautiful. It looks like the team has taken that off for these the pieces on your plate. And it's paired with a plum chutney from Jam in California. So it doesn't exactly go to a savory. It's it's just this amazing flavor profile. It's brand new to the shop. And I hope you like it. All right, back to you, Pat.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Thanks, John. So touch on the gritty texture a little bit. That's actually sort of works out well because we just learned about the calcium holding that together, holding that structure together. And as you might imagine, there's a certain window of, if there's enough calcium in there, you get sort of a firmer cheese that's really crumbly feeling. If there's no calcium in there, there's no structure, you get a crumbly cheese, and there's sort of a sweet spot within there that comes out silky smooth. And you can sort of taste the full spectrum tonight as how much acid's in that cheese. You know, this cheese is less acidic than the other ones, so it had more calcium in there, so it's sort of holding it together more. Think about maybe that's why it's causing a little firmer, gritty texture. That's one possible reason among like 17 others. But
Awesome.
it is actually, I'm sorry, what was that?
I said that's awesome. Thanks for sharing.
I like it. Often people would ask me that when I was working behind a cheese counter, and usually by the end of that spiel, they were like, just please ring me up.
Yeah, just give me the cheese. That's what I really.
I used to be an academic, and I wouldn't be an academic if I didn't put an overly complex flow chart on a slide. So here's an example of all the various chemicals and things that can be formed during proteolysis, and proteolysis means the protein breakdown. Some of these are really, really unique to cheddar, and some of them we've tasted today. Here you can see NH3. That's that ammonia we smell on the surface of red rock. Here you can see sulfur compounds. That's some of the eggy or struck match flavors that people have been picking up. Again, here's methyl sulfide, which is sometimes, you know, like that natural gas smell. Here we have indole, which is cool genetic trait of indole. 80% of the population think pure indole smells like fecal material. The remaining 20% thinks it smells like flowers. One of my favorite little sensory tidbits. And when it's in balance with things, it can almost give like a earthy sort of, you know, an interesting flavor. If it was missing from cheddar, you'd know. If it was too high in cheddar, you'd also know. And then you have phenols. Phenols are sort of a different version of alcohol and acid compounds. These all can contribute some fruity or flowery or perfumey flavors, and you may get some of those tonight too. So that's just a little bit on where you're tasting, where it's coming from. A little bit about texture. This we talked about in various ways tonight, and we're going to keep talking about it. Here we're going to talk about basically a difference between an open age and open air kind of style, like the Flores truckle we have here. This actually isn't a picture of Flores truckle, but it's made aged in a similar way. These are bandage wrap. As you might imagine, wrapped in cloth, water's free to leave. And we can sort of put in together our minds why an aged cheddar like that is dry and crumbly. But we also had cheeses tonight that were aged like this, like the Deer Creek, for example. water's not escaping through that plastic. That's impermeable plastic, but it also gets more crumbly and feels drier. So why is that? If it has the same water content 2 years later as it did the day it was made, why is the texture so dramatically different? It has to do with the breakdown of protein. We've talked about where the flavor comes from. Well, protein's the structure of cheese. So of course, if it breaks down, it's also going to change the texture. So here's an example of a protein backbone for the biochemist on the call. I apologize for the rudimentary chemical structure. But here you have what's known as a peptide bond. That's the bond that's holding protein together. Over time, in the presence of water, it can be accelerated through enzymes or through temperature or through various other things. You can break down this protein chain. You can break down that peptide bond and basically clip it in half. And it uses a water molecule to do that. It's known as a hydrolysis reaction. And that's what's responsible for aged cheeses getting more crumbly and drier, is this protein is breaking down with time. And water doesn't need to leave for this to happen. In fact, as you see, water's used to make it happen. So you can get drier, more dry feeling, crumblier cheeses in a vacuum packed texture, in a vacuum packed package rather, just as well as you can from something that has permeability to water, like a cloth. And there's that water molecule is highlighting that. Okay, I think maybe we'll move to the next one.
Awesome. So we've got Humboldt Fog here, y'all, which is going to be our 6th cheese. It is a gorgeous goat's milk cheese from California. Mary Keene is one of the ladies of the 80s, we call her, one of the sort of first artisan cheesemakers. If you remember that graph at the beginning that Pat showed, where the curve started going up for artisanal cheese producers, she would have been at the number like 5, and now it's going up to 900. So she was one of the first. She was living on a land in California. One of their kiddos, she wanted to switch to a goat's milk diet, and she didn't have goats. Went to the neighbors who had wild goats on the farm and asked if she could use the milk, and they said, if you could catch them, you can have them. And she took some days, Hazel and Esmeralda, and then she started making cheese. This is their flagship, their signature Humboldt Fog. Texture is almost like solidified yogurt almost now, since it's been out so long. This line down the middle, this is a food grade vegetable ash. And as Pat had talked about before, this beautiful Penicillium camemberti molded rind on the outside. Definitely eat the inside first, taste this almost chalky curd-like texture, then taste the cream line, see what that tastes like, and then taste the mold and see what that tastes like, then taste them together. And we've got it paired with dried tart cherries tonight, which is awesome.
That's good, yeah. So
back to you.
Okay. So here is, we'll talk really quickly about some of the cool chemistry involved with Humboldt Fog. It's pretty unique in that it's using ash and it's using white mold. Here we go. So what is the purpose of ash? We can think about historically where ash came from. It's actually debated. I should give a disclaimer that the bandage thing I mentioned earlier, the color thing, it's hotly debated in cheese history circles. And by cheese history circles, I mean me and the 3 other people who care enough about it to make a circle of ourselves. But you may hear different opinions if you ask me or the other 3 people who research this stuff. And ash is a similar thing. I'm sorry, what was that, John?
Does that mean that if you bring this up at a bar, you might be either agreed with or punched? Like, is it gonna create, do we need to preface our folks with it, using it in normal conversation?
That's true. You should qualify it. And if the person you're talking to disagrees, they're not someone you should have in pleasant company. You should just write them off.
Perfect, thank you.
All hope is lost.
I appreciate the clarification.
In today's polarized society, this is the most polarizing to me, is where orange cheddar came from.
Yeah.
But here's an actual picture of Humboldt Fog right here. Whoops. And you can sort of see, this is the center chalky part that John was mentioning with the ash line. And the ash being in the center, not only does it make a really nice sort of symmetrical appearance, the historical idea about where this came from is historically, cows did not produce that much milk. We've now genetically engineered them to produce a lot of milk. So a cheesemaker, a small cheesemaker had 1 or 2 cows, would make enough milk to make half a cheese. So they would pile up that curd in their vat. You can imagine just, you know, it's in a vat here or in a mold. And then they pile that curd in there. And then they wanted to put something on it to keep the flies away from it, to sort of, quote unquote, you know, basically their version of plastic wrap, until they can make more curd and put it on top the next day. So what did they do? Well, how are they heating this milk? There's a little fire underneath this little pot that's going here. Here's my attempt to draw fire. Wow, that's pretty rough. And the fire's out at this point. So what are they going to do? They're going to take some of this ash down here and just sprinkle it on top. And that ash is now serving as the sort of preservative, if you will, until they can get around putting more curd on it the following day. That's the historical story about where it comes about. I'm skeptical in some ways, but that's the best answer I have now until I do more research. What's important for that, not only is visually pretty cool, ash, is, you may or may not know, it's very alkaline in nature. It neutralizes acidity. And we just learned there's lots of acid being produced in this cheese. So when you neutralize some of that acidity, what happens is the cheese gets soft and gooey. It gets this gooey edge. So where there is ash, eventually it will turn gooey. Anybody's saying, well, why is the center not gooey if there's ash? Well, there's something else being used here that does an even better job of making cheese gooey, and that's white mold. Anyone who has brie knows brie mold does a pretty good job of making things gooey, and that's why you get this gooey ring on the outside. It's because that mold is breaking down the protein and reducing the acidity. But a big misnomer I hear is the cheese is soft just because the mold is breaking it down. Actually, also because of it's producing ammonia, like we learned earlier, and ammonia neutralizes acidity as well. And if you don't believe me, you can do this little experiment at home. You can get a piece of cheese, like fresh chev or anything that's real chalky and firm, and you can put it in a Tupperware container with some ammonia or Windex. At this point, you probably don't want to eat the cheese anymore. And it will melt into ice cream. This is a little, this is an example of a little trivia question I had on my Instagram last year of, I put a cheese in here. This was fresh chev, so crumbly white chev, and this little dish of ammonia. And within a few minutes, it was melting like ice cream, and all because just that gas that's produced by the ammonia neutralizes the acidity. When you neutralize the acidity, the cheese sort of falls apart. The mold's doing that for us here in this case. You don't have to go out and buy Windex. So I think that's a benefit there. But I love Humboldt fog because you get a really nice contrast of textures and flavors that some people have been saying in the chat. You have the center, which is really tart and sort of nice and crumbly. You have the outside creamy part, which is more mushroomy, earthy, really soft and spreadable. And you get to see sort of the full spectrum of cheese chemistry in a single piece of cheese, which I think is pretty cool. But the mold does break down some protein as well. I do want to mention that. Here's an example of the same cheese. This is blue cheese day 1 that was microwaved for 30 seconds, doesn't melt at all. And anyone who knows blue cheese, like, how is that possible? Blue cheese is great at melting. It's on burgers all the time. That's because the mold, as it matures, chopped up that protein. We learned earlier how these little bits of calcium go away. Well, if you break down what the calcium's holding together, that also makes it get broken down. So you can chop up this protein, like we learned, proteolysis is occurring. The mold's really good at that. So now when you go to melt the cheese, it just falls apart. And that's basically what's happening on the outside of Humboldt fog to some degree. Some of that's going on, some of that ammonia is going on, lots of things are going on. So that's some of the chemistry there. Real quickly, I wanted to mention cheese crystals. If you came across a crunch in any of your cheeses tonight, or any cheeses you could come to in the future, in fact, I'll send a PDF of this to John maybe, and he can make sure y'all get a PDF copy of this. You'll get some crystals. Really common in aged cheddars are these white crystals on the surface, which are calcium lactate. And now you guys can know where these names come from. We know calcium is chock full of in cheese, pun intended, and it's the glue holding it together. Lactate is just another word for lactic acid, which we know where that comes from now. So lots of calcium in cheese, lots of acid in cheddar. It can form crystals. Some of these other crystals you may find in other cheeses as well, but calcium lactate is usually what you associate with cheddar. The dry jack we're going to try, you may get some of that, but like we said earlier, there's less acid in it. A hallmark of protein breakdown are tyrosine and leucine crystals, which you're going to try in the Vela dry jack here. Basically, the protein gets chopped up into its substituent pieces, some of which are amino acids. Amino acids are just the building blocks of proteins. And when these build up to high enough amounts, which they do in lots of aged cheeses like Parmesan, for example, or the dry jack, they crystallize out and they form these little distinct white specks in the body of the cheese that are crunchy. And that's where those are coming from. These other crystals down here are there, but they're less common, and I don't want to keep boring people with different chemistry that we're not going to try. That's going to be a different class later on, perhaps. So with that, that's all the science I have for you guys. So maybe we can talk about the dry jack.
Yeah, and Pat, I just went ahead and did a screen grab of your crystals page, and I just added it into the chat window. So if anybody wants to, this is a benefit of having 3 screens up at once. So if you want to download it, just click the button there, and then you can have it on your desktop. But we'll talk about how awesome that was. The last cheese that we're just getting to, this is Vela's dry jack. Vela is a company in California. Pat, do you want to just talk about the difference between regular jack and an aged jack? It's an American original, defined as an American original, one of the 5, I think, governmentally stated American original cheeses that exist. But it was made to fill a void in the market for Italian style aged cheeses that we weren't importing into the markets because of some wars that were happening in the early part of last century. So we weren't supporting Italian cheesemakers at that time. So Pat, I'm going to throw you. Do you want to just talk briefly about the difference between a classic Monterey Jack and then this dry aged, very intense cheese?
Yeah, so we learned a little earlier about Monterey Jack really was. It's sort of, if you make cheddar, you can sort of make Monterey Jack. And that comes about through keeping a little more moisture in, having less acidity. Like John said, that's more mimicking a lot of the classic Italian style cheeses that aren't very aged, namely mozzarella. Here, they're not so much doing the stretching step, just because, again, you're trying to make it in the same factory you'd make a cheddar. But those are being retasked for different things now. And in a similar fashion, cheese meant to be eaten young and a cheese meant to be eaten aged are actually made a little differently. If they went and made regular old Monterey Jack and tried to age it like this one, it wouldn't turn out very well because all that excess moisture would basically create a nice little soup for those microbes to go crazy in, and they would break down that protein too much, cause bitterness, those kinds of things. So you have to make a cheese with its end point in mind. So in the dry jack case, they actually add a little more salt, because when you age a cheese longer, you want to add a little more salt just because it sort of helps slow down those cultures, keeps them at a slow and steady pace instead of going gangbusters and creating all sorts of off flavors, and a little less moisture. This cheese is aged and it's going to lose some moisture along the way, and you try to basically give it a jump start by draining away more whey up front. And then the cultures they're adding. If you're going to age the cheese, you have more time for cultures to take effect, so they're going to add different sets of cultures as well. They're going to add more of a culture called Lactobacillus oviticus, which is one key determinant of when you're going to get those crystals. Also often contributes some more of those nutty, sweet, fruity flavors that you get in cheeses as well. And that's really distinctive in things like the dry jack. If you ever had a The Gruyere styles, it's found in there as well. It's a lot of sweet style cheddars or sweet style American cheeses now. We're using that culture to quite a bit of degree because it gives sweetness, but it also covers up bitterness. So it's sort of a 2-for-1.
Well, this was amazing. That cheese tastes great tonight. And it's paired with Dick Taylor's Fleur de Sel chocolate. So try that rind. It's rubbed in cocoa oil and black pepper. It's beautiful cheese and it breaks a lot of cheese wires. So we respect it in a great way. It's amazing. And y'all, that was amazing. Thank you, Pat, for teaching me so many new things tonight. And thank you everybody for being a part of this. There's something new I learn about cheese every single day, and it's what keeps me motivated to keep going after 12 years in cheese, and I hopefully have a lifetime left of it. I know that there's a lot of divisiveness out there right now and a lot of things going on in the world, and so I'm super grateful for all of you that have joined us tonight to be a part of this. When we get to talk about these cheesemakers, we really get to support friends and family all across the country who are having a difficult time managing things like the pandemic and managing things like wildfires. And so thank you for your time, your patience, your energy. Pat, thank you for spending this evening with us. You inspire us each time you come and spend an evening with us. I feel bad that Kendall has drawn the short stick each time, and I'm getting to be a part of this because she's with the kids watching, taking care of them. But thank you so much. Happy birthday to your mom. Thank you for sharing Pat with us tonight. He's the Mick Jagger of cheese. You've heard it. This probably wasn't the first time you've been called Mick Jagger of cheese. But I am going, because we don't have any other questions that were asked, I don't think we had any more questions that were asked. I am going to turn on everybody's microphone so they can say thank you on the way out. Y'all, this was amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Y'all are amazing. All right, I'm unmuting everybody.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, John.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. That was great. Love it.
President.
More cheese.
Cheers.
President.
Cheers. Cheers. And happy birthday to your mom. Cheers. And happy birthday to your mom.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your mom should be proud. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Best cheese one ever, Pat. Yeah, that's awesome.
There's little
Oh,
Waylon.
there's another puppy. Look, Winston.
Oh, awesome. Apparently, Ashley wants to taste hamster cheese. We got a request for cheese 301.
Okay, well, I'm gonna let you source that one, John. I don't know.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for being a part of this, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the night. Pat, somebody did say your mom should be proud because you're awesome. So
Oh, thank you guys.
have an amazing
Appreciate
night,
it.
y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.